Okay, so what I want to do is quite quickly, because I've already used 4 of my minutes out of my normal 15. So I'll try and whiz through things.
Excuse me, Simon, could you just let in the other participants?
Could I do what, sorry?
Could you let in the other participants?
They're all in.
They're all in, are they?
Yeah,
okay,
they're
fine.
all in, yeah.
Okay.
That's fine. Okay, so we're going to do what's coming up, what's actually up, and we'll then move on to Bud. Okay, so in terms of the season ahead, I've got the speakers here, and you'll note the social evening chats and quizzes I talked about on the 16th of December, so please think about coming along to that. And on the 13th of January, this is the new edition that your organising team have got for you to hopefully brighten up January for you. We've got Damien Peach talking about high resolution astrophotography. So he'll be going into the ins and outs of how he's created some amazing shots of not just Mars, but Jupiter, Saturn, etc. through the years. How he's done it from his home near Portsmouth, and also about some of his alliances that he's got with some people that run telescopes down in Chile, the Chilescope, that some of his very high resolution images are coming from. So that's going to be very exciting. And as I say, we've got the rest there. The one change might be on the 31st of March and Peter Williamson. He's prepared to, but he preferred to do his talk in person because he normally brings along guitars, etc. He's someone you'd love, Bud. I'm not sure if you know Pete Williamson, but if there's any possibility that he can bring his guitars, then he wants to do that in the museum. So we might rearrange the 31st just to satisfy his wish to be able to have a riff in Herschel's house. Okay. What have we got coming up in the night sky? We've got the Geminid and Ursid meteor showers, and on the 21st of December, we've got Jupiter and Saturn coming together in the night sky. It's not going to last very long in terms of being visible that evening, but the closest point is going to be between 4:30 and 5:30 on the 21st. That's a Monday. So you're going to need a really good low down southwesterly horizon to see it. But it's once the sun goes down, there'll be about 10 degrees, maybe a little higher than that in the sky, and then they'll quickly duck below the horizon. So
log back in again.
Okay, right.
Yeah, he's coming back in, I think.
He is. I can see him running around the place. So no, can't hear you now, Simon. Muted.
Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
God, dear. So I was talking about the Great Conjunction, Jupiter and Saturn. So that'll be a really good thing to see. And depending how things are, potentially, if the weather's good, and rules allow, it might be one to go to sort of White Sheet Hill or somewhere with a really good southwesterly view to have a look at that. You can see it from anywhere, but you say you're just going to need sort of a nice low down sky.
They're pretty close to next month. I mean, even tonight, they are, no.
Yeah, and it's just getting better and better.
In the sky. It is.
Yeah, and don't forget Mars. It's still up there, and it's reduced about 20% in size from opposition. But just every opportunity, have a look at it, because it's been quite a close opposition that we've had, and it's well worth a look. In fact, all the planets are visible this coming month, except Mercury, which is a bit difficult to try and catch. But yeah, so I've been spending a bit of time having a good look at Uranus and Neptune as well, which I don't often get to spy. So there's lots to see out there. Right, does that mean my screen share has dropped as well, does it? Yeah, it probably did.
Yeah, we can see you, but can't see your screen share.
I thought it was my son gaming, but it turns out it wasn't.
It's your wife gaming instead.
Yeah, it could have been. Yeah. So I talked about Uranus. Now, I've had lots of cloudy nights, but hopefully you can see this. This is, I used the Lowells Telescope, Canary number 4, and I just took photos when it wasn't cloudy in the Canaries. And you can actually see the moons going around Uranus here.
Good.
over a period of 4 days. And we've got the one that's taken the longest, the furthest out, that's Oberon. That's about 13 days, 13 and a half days, all the way to the one in the middle that's whizzing around, which is Ariel as well. They're not huge telescopes in the SLU network, but you can get to see that, and you can actually see sort of, not quite real time, but you can see and work out scientifically orbital periods just for taking a few photos on what is a publicly available network, although you do have to pay a few pennies every month to do that. The big one that's still around and definitely worth having a look at is, of course, Mars. And so we've got a Damien Peach shot here. This is from the Chile scope, and this one was taken. But the resolution that they're getting here, you can actually see the break within the southern polar cap. You see the sort of 2 blocks as a bar through it. So there's so much detail they're getting. And this was just a couple of weeks ago, they took this particular shot. So I think this is, it's a 1 meter telescope, the Chile scope. And so you can see loads of stuff going on there in detail. It's sort of quite bizarre to be able to see all of this detail when about 10, 15 years ago, Mars was still fuzzy blobs and it was all pictures from spacecraft. And now you've got images this good just done from Earth. So it's really kind of cool. There's other stuff going on, of course. There's the comet M3 Atlas, which has left Orion and heading north. I think it's about magnitude 8 or so, magnitude 9. So it's one for telescopes, but if you want to see yourself a comet. And there's loads of other stuff going on. If you're into your sunspotting, there's a massive sunspot that's just come on, AR 2786. So if the sun does come out tomorrow, go and have a look at it. It's just coming on. It hasn't got to the center of the sun yet, so we've got a few more days. So for the next 2 weeks or so, there's a huge sunspot target on the sun, and there's another 2 smaller sunspots as well. So if you've had your solar kit sort of dormant for many moons, then now's your time to get that kit out. There's lots of stuff happening in space. We've got the Chang'e 5 land and rock sample, bring back 2 kilos of rocks from the moon. And we've got lots of stuff that SpaceX are doing with Starlink. Unfortunately, another 60 went up this morning. But their Starship SN8 attempted to test its engines the other day, and everyone thought it was blowing up. Turns out it was a concrete failure underneath. So the Starships are still moving on. The Space Launch System is being stacked, ready for launch next year. But the sad news for this month in astronomical terms, from a worldwide perspective, is Arecibo is dead. They've decided it's unsafe to try and repair it. So that icon of astronomy, radio astronomy and Bond movies is no more. We talked about the conjunction. The conjunction, and this is effectively what it looks like in slow-mo as we go through. So you'll see the 2 planets coming together. So by the 8th of December now, they'll be a short bit apart, but when we get to the 21st, they'll be essentially side by side in the sky. What does that actually look like? Is Jupiter races past Saturn? Well, they'll be like that in the sky, literally on top of each other. You'll only see one bright point, and this is effectively what you'd see from the eyepiece in the slightly speeded up time. So you'll see the Galilean moons come into your field of view with, say, Saturn in the middle, and Jupiter will be there. So on a low power, you should be able to see this, and that hasn't been seen for quite as good as this for 398 years. When the telescopes were first invented. So knowing my luck, it'll be cloudy, but if it isn't, then it's one not to miss. So the afternoon going into evening of the 21st, Monday, the 21st of December, definitely one to get out. What else is in the news? Our work at Moncton Combe School Telescope is ongoing. We only allow 1 person at a time for those that are willing to volunteer, because we are volunteers for the school, so it's allowed under regulations. Mike Hasborn has been doing some great work to get rid of some of the Victorian engine, also understand the Victorian engineering mysteries, but also get rid of some of the bodging that was done in the 1970s and 1980s to the telescope. So bit by bit, we've got an operational observatory there, and the school has actually started using it. So not the main telescope, but they've got 2 telescopes which are stored in there, and they're also powered off the power system that Chris Brooks has put in with 12-volt batteries. So they're actually using that now. We can't assist them in that observing, of course, because we're not in their bubble. But once we get out of COVID and things a bit more manageable, then this is a resource that we'll use for outreach across the whole of the Bath area. And we'll also be supporting the school in the activities they're doing. So you'll notice there's boards, display boards all the way around. It's for the schools to do project work. And we'll reserve one of those for project work outside of the Monkton Combe school system as well. So everyone can have a little bit of that. And that's part of the payment that's is accepted by Monkton Combe, that we're doing all this work and it's to open it up for the community. So it's not just a school resource, it's going to be for the entire community of Bath. And effectively, we're the people running it. So that's really good. And thank you for the help we've had from individuals in making sure that works. Okay, so you've been very patient. So I'm going to move forward and introduce Bud, our speaker for tonight, a professional musician. He's an astrophotographer who's sort of been noted in several competitions, etc. He's dubbed the last of the Somerset Beach Boys because essentially not only has he had an ongoing fascination with astronomy, but also music. There's 2 passions that have followed him through his long and illustrious life. So he's built his own telescopes at a young age. He's also built his own electric guitars, and sort of essentially he's sort of your amateur astronomer who's sort of just kept it going and sort of got all that energy and enthusiasm. And but also in many ways he's a performer. I was very interested to find out that he'd actually shared a stage, I believe, Bud, with was it Adge Cutler and the Wurzels?
That's right, yes.
Yeah, that must be quite special, because I found this. Yeah, so I didn't realize that they'd actually written a song about the Somerset Space Race. Did you ever get to sing along to the Somerset Space Race? No. Yeah. So when was that? When were you on the? Was it the Scrumper Tour?
Right, I'm just trying to remember now because I just been gone for a while. But all the years seem to blur by. If I can remember those, mostly trumpet.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons this came to mind is because I'm doing the quiz questions on music for December the 16th, and this was going to be one of your questions, everyone. But it's okay, you're not going to get it. What were the Wurzels and Adge Cutler singing about? But perhaps next time. All right. But he also sings. Now, I'm not sure I've actually got sound on this, which is a bit of a shame. I'm not sure why sound isn't working on here. But if you want to check it out on YouTube, our illustrious speaker, Bud, has also been penning new songs and is still performing, and performing in this case on YouTube as well. I'm not sure I give you a taste in shirts. That's not an astronomical shirt. You can track to do them pretty slickly. That's on the lighter side, but on the more serious side, you're quite an accomplished astrophotographer, Bud, and you've been entering stuff in, was it the Astronomy Photographer of the Year? And you've got into the final few, and so you've got a wonderful photo here, and we've got another one, which actually, I'm very jealous of this because that's very crisp, the detail you've managed to get in and around Archimedes, and that very strong shadow line you've got on the Alps. So I'm kind of jealous. So those are your credentials So a very worthy speaker for us, both in terms of sort of the lighter side of life and as well as the enjoying your astronomy. Okay, it's your turn, Bud. If you'd like to find out a bit more about Bud, there's his web address, but I'll stop sharing now and I'll hand over to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. How do you follow that introduction? I hope the presentation we got for you this evening will be equally entertaining and instructive as well. Right, first of all, let me go and share the presentation first. I'll do that. And there we are, share that. And here we go. Right, and start from the beginning, as we should. Right, this is called A Life on Mars. It's not about life on Mars, creepy crawlies or whatever else, but this is about the people who have made Mars their life study, both historically and current, and maybe a little bit of a glimpse into the future as well. Primarily, my interest in Mars stems from the fact that as a youngster, I would read all these wonderful science fiction stories about the Martians and various other creatures coming to visit Earth. But when I was able to start using astronomy as a real serious tool for observation, I realized half of this stuff was just in the imaginations, very fertile imaginations of the writers of the time. But anyway, this is A Life on Mars, and our story begins. Oh, by the way, before we go any further, that picture you see, that's my image of Mars taken about a month or so ago. Yes, 21st of September this year, a little bit before opposition, because I wanted to try and see if I could get any shadow details of any of the things. And I think I've kind of succeeded. Not quite up to the Chile scope standard, but then this is from my backyard in Yeovil, light polluted as it is. But you know, if you work long and hard enough at it, you'll get a result of some sort. But that's probably the best I could get. And given that the polar cap isn't quite as crisp as the Chile scope team gets, well, that's because it's Yeovil and not Chile. Right, well, we move on from here, and our story starts with life on Mars with this. For about 150 odd years, you know, Mars has been this strange exotic planet up in the sky. And there was a lot of speculation about 150 years ago that was started by this fellow here. And this is our first guest star, Giovanni Schiaparelli. He was a student in Milan. He went and worked later on after he'd finished his studies in Germany and also in St. Petersburg, but returned to Milan and became the director of the Milan Observatory. And obviously, being the director, he could do more or less what he wanted to do, I guess. And in that year, I put the timelines on here because it's quite interesting to note just when these things were happening. Around the age of about 40, he started looking at Mars, and he thought he could see channels on the surface of Mars. Now, channels in Italian is canali, and when this was interpreted into the English language a little while later, one or two people misinterpreted canali as being canals, and of course, canals can mean only one thing, that they are built, they are an artificial feature, not a natural one. And this piqued the interest of our next guest star, which is an American, a wealthy American businessman by the name of Percival Lowell. There he is. I remarked last time I gave this presentation how stern he looks in that picture. Now, I did manage to find an image of Percival Lowell when he was a lot younger. Not much change, I'm afraid. He looks much the same as he does there, except he looked a bit younger and with more hair. But then I think that's the way for all of us. And in 1894, he began observing Mars. Now, he's the man of money. He's got loads of cash. And he's able to, first of all, commission some architects and surveyors agents, in fact, to go out and find him the very, very best place in America where he can set up a half-decent observatory. And they came back with the suggestion that Flagstaff, Arizona was probably one of the best situations he could manage. It's about 5,500 feet above sea level, I think. I could be wrong on that one, but I think it's about there. And also that the sky is perpetually clear, about 360 days clear blue skies. It makes you quite envious, doesn't it? But anyway, there he is. He's got all this money. He's built himself an observatory. Now he also wants to fit that observatory up with a half-decent telescope. Now, what for you and I might be a half-decent telescope, I don't know, 5 or 6 inch refractor, or maybe a 10 or 11, 12-inch reflector of some sort or another. No, not this guy. He was going to go the whole hog. And he commissioned a glassmaker called Alvin Clark and Sons, to make him this thing, a 24-inch f11.3 refractor, which is at Flagstaff, Arizona. I'll just ask you for a moment to feast your eyes on the detail of this image. You may notice that its construction appears to be like that of a boiler. It is a boilerplate rivet construction. That's the top part of the picture. And also, he seems to have all sorts of control knobs and rods, and a finder scope with a finder scope on top of that, because this is a huge, huge monster. However, with this huge monster of a telescope, he's still dissatisfied with the picture, the image quality. And so he's stepping down the aperture of this 24-inch. No point in having a 24-inch in that respect. But he's stepping down the aperture quite considerably, sometimes even only using 3 inches of the aperture. And what he's seeing through this big, huge, humongous big scope is Lowell's canals. Now look at them. He's drawn lines everywhere, hither and thither in arcs, or maybe they're not quite because of the curve of the Martian terrain or whatever. But nonetheless, he's seeing all these canals. Now, it's been suggested in recent times that this huge telescope of his was nothing more than a great big ophthalmoscope, and what he was seeing were the veins in the back of his eye. But there you go. Having paid all that money and put this beautiful observatory in commission, he's every right to think he can see canals. Now, there's his team of people. I'm not quite sure who the lady with the hat is and what book she's holding, but I am rather drawn to that forlorn figure that's sitting off to the side, who's just been told, no, you can't be in the picture. But there you go. And there's Lowell in the middle, looking suitably stern, along with the other guys, probably his bank manager, his accountant, and maybe the income tax inspector. I don't know, whoever they were, but there they go. And give this, oh yeah, just before we leave this one, again, I think you've got a slightly better view of the telescope now, and the intricate boilerplate rivet mechanism that holds it all together. A wonderful piece of engineering. You do wonder how they managed to make anything quite so long. This is getting on to be a 23-foot long tube. A lot of metalwork and extremely heavy. And I was given to understand that the bearings on this particular mount had almost worn out, and they had to replace them some time back when they refurbished the Flagstaff Observatory. But there we go. And the last picture from Lowell's Observatory is this one. Now, everything about this picture screams, oh, my back. I mean, you imagine what contortionism he had to go through to be able to use this thing. And it looks as if that whole contraption, made out of wood, all runs round on little casters, you can see, or perhaps they're not quite so little, but casters, which presumably somebody had to drag round for him. So not unlike the Earl of Ross with his 72-inch monster, he needed a team of people, his servants, that is, Lord Ross, to move the stuff around, whereas Lowell probably had paid members of the observatory staff to do that. But anyway, there you go. He's enjoying an evening's worth of viewing of Mars with the behemoth. Now, the big question. Now, don't forget, this is, getting on for 150, 120, 150 years ago now. People are asking the question, if there are canals on Mars, then does that mean that there was intelligent life on Mars? So the fiction writers of the era wasted no time in producing lots of books. I'm sure there was a lot of good stuff in amongst the rubbish, but a lot of people were writing about Mars and the kind of exotic beings that could possibly be living on the surface of Mars. And this one particular person, Edgar Rice Burroughs, who you may recognize from such epics as Tarzan of the Apes, brought the idea to the public through his many fantasy books. And he wrote, and there was, I think, John Carpenter and the Princess of Mars. Now, this is all very, very unscientific. The John Carter manages to go from Earth to Mars in one whoosh, whatever that was, and finds himself on the surface of Mars, able to breathe the atmosphere, of course, which has just got the right amount of oxygen, and meet people there who looked very, very similar to us. And of course, the artists of the time wasted no time in depicting what they thought were the Martians. Now, from great big green monsters with huge claws, they also imagined that if Edgar Rice Burroughs thought there were Martian princesses living on there, then the Martian princesses had to look a little bit like this. Okay, now avert your gaze of those of you who may be of a nervous disposition, but when this was when this was drawn, it was probably very, very risque and risky, but it wouldn't look out of place in a Little Mix concert now, would it? Yeah, I think they could learn a trick or two from this picture, but look at the intricate headgear. Yeah, and the shoulder wing pads. Oh, yeah. Well, if there's exotic creatures like that living on Mars, well, maybe John Carter had a point. Anyway, enough of the Princess of Mars. Do I have your permission to move on, everyone? Yes. Okay. A few nods from one or two people. Right, here we go. So, apart from some very nice looking Martian babes, why would we want to go to Mars? And is there anywhere else we could go, and how far are we prepared to travel? This is the thing, actually. We've grown used to hearing things in millions of miles and millions of kilometers. And, it doesn't matter whether it's miles or kilometers, it's the millions bit in front of it that makes you think, oh, crikey, that's a long way to go. In a spacecraft, millions of miles. But I'm trying to put it into perspective for you now. Let's just see if this works for you. Right. Now, let's go on to the next slide. This is the Earth, of course, and we know the Earth is nearly 8,000 miles in diameter. And with that object, the H object, if you can see it clearly on your screens, is the International Space Station, which circles the Earth about 250 miles up. Now, if you combine that total diameter of 8,000 plus 250, that's 500, and then you work out pi d, you work out a circumference of nearly 26,500 miles. And yet the ISS can do all those miles in 90 minutes. So one orbit, 90 minutes. Therefore, to do 38 orbits, which would take 57 hours, that's all it takes to travel 1 million miles. So suddenly 1 million miles or 1 million kilometers doesn't seem like quite such a long way, especially if you're whizzing around at the orbital speed of 5 miles per second or 17,500 miles per hour. But there we are. So 38 orbits to travel 1 million miles. doesn't seem quite as daunting now. So if we take that into account and say, okay, let's now see what we could do. Let's just look at Venus, our nearest neighbor. At its nearest, 26 million miles away. It's not far different from the Earth in size, so gravitationally it would be okay to be almost like being back home. What would it take to get there, and what would we expect to find when we got there? So let's just have a look. Well, it's not exactly Costa del Sol. Look at that air pressure, 90 bars. That's 90 times 15 pounds per square inch if you're in old style engineering, or one bar if you're going metric. But to think of the air pressure being 90 times that, can you imagine weight of the atmosphere all around you, crushing you 90 times more than on the surface of Earth? Combine that with a rather warm temperature of 460 degrees Celsius and clouds of sulfuric acid, which may or may not entertain floating life. I think they peaked too early on that one, didn't they? About the floating jellyfish up in the sky, well, whatever they are. We can see that Venus hasn't got a great deal to offer. And the pressure, actually, I was going to say the pressure on the surface of Venus is like being half a mile down in the ocean. That's the kind of pressure you'd have on the walls of your submarine. 90 bars at about half a mile down. That's considerable. I don't think I'd care to be on a planet like that where it's a case of being crushed to death rather than exploding. Oh, imagine, none of those options seem very favorable, do they? But anyway, so we haven't really got much to look forward to on Venus other than perhaps landing something or getting something to float up in the atmosphere where it might be a little bit easier to observe the planet. But let's move on. So Venus definitely not a nice place to visit. So it kind of leaves Mars, doesn't it? Now this picture of Mars, by the way, is one I took again through a 5-inch refractor. Back in 2012, when the technology wasn't quite as good as what I have now. But I have to say, it actually stacks up reasonably well compared. And, you know, that's as it is. Right, so Mars, an average of 48 million miles away, but maybe easier to do. Maybe easier to do. Let's just take a look, see what it would take to get ourselves to Mars if we could. Now, this is my take on a rather imaginative spacecraft powered by Bud's super hyperdrive, which hasn't been invented yet, but something else I've got to get round to. So I will get round to that perhaps next week. And also the challenge of getting there and back, because it's one thing. Do you remember when President Kennedy stood up we gave that famous speech back in 62-ish, 63, 62, 62, said, it is our intention to put a man on the moon and bring him back safely to the Earth. And I guess nobody fancies a one-way ticket to Mars, although I have been told that people have actually applied to be the first Martian colonists. Okay. I don't think I'll be in the first wave of people going. So this would be quite a big step for mankind. Now, without boring you with the details of delta V, it's an equation that says how much mass you need in a way of propellant or something to move you in one direction while you're expelling all this energy behind you. And that this sort of law of equal and opposite reactions is the whole basic concept. The delta V tells you how much mass you can put into space, provided you can expel sufficient mass at the back end of your machine. So this is something that would have to be addressed. And people have said, well, wouldn't it be easier perhaps if we could send stuff out in advance? Because you see, as we probably realized, the business of getting to Mars isn't quite so simple as we thought, because you cannot just launch a rocket from Earth and point it at Mars and hope to get there and able to slow down once you get to Mars to be able to eventually land on Mars. So the problem with this is that you've got to try and ease yourself into Mars's frame of reference. And you see the Hohmann transfer orbit. Oh, good old Walter there, looking again, another one looking suitably stern. Look at him, and with his wire glasses and that kind of grim Teutonic look. And judging by the year that he died, 1945, I guess he would have been around. In fact, I think he was a resident of Dresden and suffered terribly mental health issues as a result of the bombing of Dresden. But there you go. So he didn't live as long as he might have had. But you see, he's one of these very clever German minds who got involved in rocketry in Germany in the 1920s and early 30s, and figured out that unless you had unlimited supplies of fuel, you just cannot get from one place to the other with sheer brute force and ignorance. You've got to be able to use the clockwork of the solar system in order to get you there at the most economical way. Now, remember that Earth's speed is going around for 18.5 miles per second. So the whole notion of thinking you're on a platform which is steady and stable and still is not true. And Mars is doing much the same thing. It's moving. So like the old anti-aircraft gunners used to have to do during the war, they would aim in front of the Heinkel bombers, and in the hope that by the time their flak got up to the height where the aircraft were, that would be the same time the aircraft got there as well. And it was a bit hit and miss, of course. So they should have had Walter work out the trajectory of these things, but there you go. Right, so here we are. Earth at time of launch, Mars at time of launch, not too far away from one another, but the whole point of it is what you're doing is you're describing a new orbit around the sun, which goes from intersecting the Earth's orbit, intersecting Mars's orbit. Now, once you've achieved the escape velocity of 25,000 miles per hour, you don't really need to do much else but follow this trajectory free of charge, as it were. So you're coasting all your way on your way to Mars. And then it's only when you get to Mars at the time of arrival would you need to employ some braking mechanism, but by which time you're already traveling at the same speed as Mars is at that point. So that's how he worked it out. And it was a fairly good notion, and it seems to work. So there we are. Mars at arrival is going to be the journey time somewhere around 8.5 months. Right, 8.5 months to get there, a little bit of time to spend at Mars, and then wait for the next bus home, as it were, and that would be another 8.5. So you're looking at a round trip, if you intend to come back, of about 2 years. Okay, so the thought of traveling anywhere for 2 years now, the Pilgrim Fathers, when they traveled to America in the 1640s, 400 years ago, had to take everything they needed with them on board, even livestock and small sort of gardens where they could grow something, and the fresh produce from the cattle and other things they had on board, in order to sustain their bodies, because as you know, without all the necessary vitamins, life becomes a little bit difficult. However, so the Hohmann transfer orbit at least gives us an opportunity to get to Mars without expending massive amount of energy, which we don't have. So, the long road to Mars. Now, forgive me for having thrown these in. I know that you're not going to get a McDonald's in space. Oh, cry you. What a shame. And also, I don't even know whether Shell is still operating anymore. But there you go. So is it an option to send equipment and fuel and well, just generally supplies ahead of the program, ahead of the actual flight itself? Well, remember, they also have to travel in this Hohmann transfer orbit of some or some kind of orbit where they can be intersected on the way around, because they're not just standing still like that Deep Space Nine space station seems to be in the same place forever, but it's not, it can't, because it would fall into the sun if it didn't have some kind of motion. So there you are. So all these things are all very well and good. They sound good in principle, but trying to get to coincide with these McDonald's and Shell stations to be in your flight plan path at the time, it would require a lot of planning, and I'm not sure how easy that would be. So if that's not to be the case, then the last fuel and food stop for the next 200 million miles is got to be taken with you, like the Pilgrim Fathers when they sailed to America. Right. This is, have we had this one? Yes, I think did I press the right button or did I not? Let me just go backwards a moment if I think. Yes. Right, I can't honestly, I think I've probably talked my way past this one now. I do beg your pardon. Nothing much here to be said other than we'll move on. Right. For some reason, 2 slides have replicated themselves. Okay, doesn't matter. Right, enough fuel, water, and oxygen for each crew member for at least 2 years. This is what we need to survive a journey to Mars. Bearing in mind how much people eat and how much you need to eat to sustain yourself normally, both in physical and mental, remember, because it's not just a case of whether you're tough enough to be able to stand it there and back. It's whether or not you're mentally robust. But you also need sufficient protection from radiation, solar radiation, and meteors. And as we know with the sun, it's you can't predict when the next big mass coronal ejection is going to be and how it might affect the crew on board. And you'd certainly need medical facility and supplies. Now, when I say medical facility and supplies, you don't just have the one doctor and maybe somebody who's trained in first aid. I think everyone on board would have to be medically trained, because if the doctor cops it, then there's no chance for the rest of them. And it's been spoken about actually how many people should be on the first trip to Mars. What would be an appropriate number of people? The right number to be able to make the journey reasonably safe and secure, with a little bit of extra, what's the word I'm looking for here? You compensate for the fact if somebody were to go down or die on the way, there'd be somebody to replace them, maybe. But the whole point of it is it's been worked out the nominal crew number should be 6. I don't know quite how they arrived at that, but 6 is the figure they're talking about. So all 6 would need to be reasonably well trained in medical practices. The other thing they would need to be is an extremely well-natured crew. Now, I'm looking around at the number of faces I can see on the small screens I've got here, and I'm asking myself the question, you know, we've been in lockdown for the first lockdown for a while, and then the second lockdown. It's made us realize how fragile human relationships can be if you're locked in one space with anybody for any length of time. And it put me in the mind of one of those band boy members who, pretty looking boy, had accidentally managed to end up with his girlfriend, a member of another band, girl band. They shacked down for the time of the first lockdown, you see, and within about 3 or 4 weeks, they were at each other's throats and couldn't stand each other anymore. So you see, just to be married or in love is not good enough, I'm afraid. This would have to be an extremely well-natured crew. And of course, it begs the question, should it be a mixed crew? Should you have male crew, or even an all-female crew, or maybe a mix of the two? And I'm afraid I'm not entirely sure how that would pan out. But that's just an interesting thought. You'd need relief from boredom. Well, there's only so many box sets you can watch, and there's only so many games you can play. And what else can we think of? You see, so the problem with spaceflight, as Tim Peake discovered when he landed in, I think it was Uzbekistan, wasn't he, after his tour on the space station, that he needed the ground crew to help pick him up and carry him to the awaiting helicopter because he couldn't use his legs terribly well. I mean, he could have tried, but I think they probably didn't want him to put any stresses on himself so early, having touched down. But the physical stress on people would be that they just would not be using their muscles, despite the fact that they on the space station, I know they work out solidly, but they need to use those muscles, and the muscles do atrophy after a while. I think the bone density it gets thinner as well. The bones get thinner as a result. So there's all these physical problems to overcome, and unless they can create some sort of artificial gravity on the spacecraft by doing what all the science fiction writers say, well, gosh, you just got to spin it round at a certain rate, and on the rim of the ring, you'll have this artificial gravity, albeit that it's centrifugal force rather than anything else. So fair enough, they could do that, but also it's the mental side of things is, and every single clunk that you hear, crikey, was that a meteor that just hit the side of the spacecraft, or a message from Earth to say there's a big mass coronal ejection heading their way, and all the psychological problems that they might suffer from. But look, we're assuming that these people are made from extremely robust stuff. We're going to move on and ask ourselves a question: what are they going to do to stay alive? This is just, forget all the other factors, this is just what they need: sustenance for each crew member per day. And if you look down that list, you'll see that they need to carry on board the spacecraft some 5 kilograms per person per day. And this would be a fairly Spartan existence, you know, because you can almost imagine there's only so many varieties of stuff they could take with them. Obviously dried food, because it weighs the least, but they still need to take water for food and just water for drinking. And of course the oxygen, which is absolutely vital. But can you imagine 3 months into the journey, and the novelty of it is just worn off, and somebody asks whoever the cook is, what have we got today? We got dried sprouts today with dried potatoes. But we had that a week ago, I know, and it's going to be the same next week, and the week after that, and the week after that. Right, okay. Now, let's imagine that we've managed to achieve Mars orbit. Remember, we've gone on the home and transfer orbit. We've been able to match our speed to Mars. Now all we need to do is a few minor adjustments with the retro rockets and everything else, the steering rockets that they have on the craft. And we're now, first of all, started off a very eccentric orbit around Mars, and then gradually gets in circular and circular as we apply the brakes even more. Because you can't just stop. There are no brakes in space, obviously. So you need to expel an equal amount of energy in the opposite direction. It's enough for you to slow down and be captured by Mars's gravity, which is a lot less than Earth's, to establish an orbit. Right, so we have options. Right, if by now, shall we say, the crew's bones have turned to jelly and they are no longer capable of moving around, albeit just maybe stabbing at one of the buttons or their touch screens, as they have. Isn't it marvelous, this new Dragon spacecraft? All the banks of switches when it used to go click, 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 and all the lights that used to consume massive amount of energy because they were all tungsten type lamps, click, 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 and all that is gone. Now you've got this touch screen stuff, and they don't even have to do anything to get into orbit anymore, but there you go. So when they get there, they can either abort the mission, which seems the terrible shame because having spent all that time getting there, they've got to now decide whether they can land or they can't land, or go into Mars orbit, or even maybe land on Phobos as a stopping off point. And then finally, the best option of all, which is the reason why they went, is to land on the Martian surface. So let's just see what that would entail. Now back to old Walter and his home and transfer orbit. Now you've got to plan this rather carefully. Mars at departure and Earth at the time of arrival and Earth at the time of departure. You see, because Earth goes round virtually, well, not double the speed, but in half the time around the sun that Mars does, then you've got to time your departure from Mars just exactly right, so that by the time you get to intersect Earth's orbit, it is where it should be, down where the yellow and the blue lines meet. So it's not a case of, oh, well, I had a quick look at Mars, let's go home. They'd have to hang about for a while until such time as that moment was right. So, but having traveled all that way, you don't want to go home now, do you? When you're so near, you don't want to be that far away, do you? So what's the other option? Now, believe me, this is a real photograph of Phobos. It is not a potato from Tesco's, although it looks like it, doesn't it? So, landing on Phobos, it's only 14 miles across. Crikey, just a lump of rock, 14 miles across. I'm just trying to think of something that Yeovil is probably from one end to the other, 7, 8, 10 miles across, maybe ish. So, yeah, Yeovil and its environs, if I can imagine that as being a potato of some sort, that's what we'd be landing on. So not much in the way of gravity or anything, but at least touching base, as it were, with Phobos. It's 3 and nearly 4,000 miles away from Mars. It does an 8-hour orbit around Mars. So it might be a good stopping off place if the worst came to the worst. I can't imagine they really want to do that. But we want to go for the real deal. And now this is the moment when I say to you that we are going to go for a landing on Mars. Now, I want you to put yourself into that spacecraft, right? All of you, if you can. Here we are. We just traveled across an ocean of space. We are relatively fit. Our bones haven't turned to jelly. We're still talking to one another, and we're ready to do the descent to the Martian surface. And we're all on board, and everything is worked up so far. No problems with any of the equipment, and we're ready to initiate the procedure to start the landing on Mars. Right, here we go. Now, you are the astronauts in that spacecraft. So I want to take you now through the next phase, which is going to be the landing, which has been described by various agencies in NASA as being the 7 minutes of terror. Ta-da! Let's have a look, see what this means. Right. As it says, a direct descent to the Martian surface. I assume that rather than my humongous craft that we've been living in for the last 8.5 months, we've actually got a lander of some sort. We wouldn't land the entire thing, obviously. But here comes the first thing. We are orbiting Mars, and we are licking around Mars at around 4 miles per second. So the first thing that we've got to do is we've got to try and reduce that speed as best as we can to whatever we can, using whatever facilities there are, either at Mars, on Mars, or that we brought with us. So let's take a look at this first phase, the aerobraking. Okay, there we see a spacecraft slamming into the Martian atmosphere. Now, just remember what I said about the Martian atmosphere. It is thin. It's got a surface pressure of about 1,000th of Earth's pressure, which is next to bugger all. Sorry, I shouldn't say words like that. Next to sod all. And it's not going to do much in the way of aerobraking, or is it? But it's sufficient to heat us up quite considerably. But past a certain point, it can take us down from the 4 miles per second to about 900 miles an hour. And just on the thin, tenuous atmosphere that is there. But that's all. and now we're still glowing red hot, and you're now hoping that the heat shield that was made by the cheapest bidder is holding up and is ablating away and taking the heat away with it. And hopefully, by the time that comes to an end, we're now traveling at 900 miles per hour. And at this stage, you're breathing a sigh of relief because you've made it through the first phase of the 7 minutes of terror. You're still terrified because here comes the next bit. From 900 miles per hour, we've got to try and at least break ourselves down to 200 miles an hour. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever experienced coming across a roundabout, not realizing it's a roundabout until it's almost too late, even at 60 miles an hour. There's a certain amount of terror there as well, realizing, this is a roundabout. I've got to slow down a bit. So now you imagine having to go from 900 miles an hour, which is a fair old lick still, down to 200. And this is where we deploy the big parachute. Now, it needs to be big because Mars's air is so thin that there's hardly anything to grab hold of. So as we've got here, the relationship between the spacecraft and the parachute itself has had to be sort of contained within the picture. But that canopy, that parachute canopy, is many times bigger than the size of the aircraft, the spacecraft. And you're hoping that the ladies who work in the Playtex factory sewed those tethers on really good and tight, and that the release mechanism worked. And yes, you can feel the drag of a parachute on the spacecraft, because if you don't, I'm afraid that you're not going to be in for much of a ride for very much longer. However, the parachute has deployed, and it has managed to slow us down to 200 miles an hour, because that's all the parachute can do size-wise. No matter how big it is, couldn't get us any slower than 200 miles an hour. At which point we would jettison the parachute. The pilot, whoever is the commander, would jettison the parachute, and then we'd employ the landing engines. And these engines haven't been tried and tested since we left Earth about 9 months ago. And you do hope that the propellant and all the mechanisms that operate the rockets are still working well, and they will gradually descend us to the surface. So we hit the ground about 2 or 3 feet up at virtually 0 miles per hour. Doing. Okay, there we are. So all you intrepid astronauts have just survived the 7 minutes of terror, and we've now landed on the surface. Now, unlike those old science fiction films, remember when they used to send people off in giant rockets to a planet that no one had ever been to before, so that everything was totally unknown, and there was every possibility that there were Martian monsters or some sort of monsters wandering around the surface, ready to kill and eat the hapless astronauts. In Mars's case, because we've sent all those probes that have been up there, Spirit, Opportunity, Endeavour, etc., and we know what the Martian surface looks like. And this is what it looks like. So we're not landing on an unknown world. We know what the surface looks like. And, you know, it looks depressingly like a desert somewhere, doesn't it, with a few rocks strewn around. But however, the previous craft that have touched down on Mars on our behalf have set up living quarters. And as you see, even Premier Inn have gotten themselves in on the act, purely and simply because it's the moon and stars there. Yes, I thought they'd be the right people to get the contract. And we've also got some Mars rovers there to take you from your landing craft to the residence hall for reception, to get booked in and make themselves at home. So after all that way, all that travel, it's a long way literally to come just for this. And I'm sure that somewhere in the back of these astronauts' minds, they might recall those old stories about Martian princesses. And as and when they open the airlock, the door, and for the first time set foot on the Martian soil, they thought they might be happy if they could be greeted by that. Now that would be worth going to Mars for, wouldn't it? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. A life on Mars. At this stage, I usually ask if there are any questions. Now, if I stop the share now, we can go back to the normal screen, yes, where everyone's up on.
Yep, that would be great, Bud. Yep.
Okay, so let me kill off the stop share. There we are. And now we're back to everyone that's is here, right?
Any questions for Bud? I've got one. Sort of, there's been lots of stuff written about Mars in terms of books, stories, popular culture. But who do you think has been most influential in sort of creating the public's view of Mars?
I think, first of all, because it's been depicted in so many films and TV series, H.G. Wells probably set the mold that the Martians were a little bit like us, quite happy to exterminate anything that gets in their way, and terraform Earth into a Mars-like planet, which probably filled people at that time full of dread and fear, because they weren't sure what the Martians would look like. And we have a precedent on Earth. When Captain Cook first landed in Australia, the Aborigines didn't quite know what to make of it all, and look how quickly their culture was swept aside very, very quickly by the Western culture. And this has happened in other places, but that's one place that springs to mind. And wherever we go, whoever comes to visit us, and I'm not entirely sure that we want to welcome any extraterrestrials, because we don't know what A, their motives are, and B, what their plans for us are. Well, we could be to them superbly fine chickens, because that's what they eat, so maybe it's not a good idea to advertise our presence here. But I think H.G. Wells has got to be the first of those who probably tried to put a scientific angle on it. But it's rather us going to Mars, the Martians would have been sufficiently advanced to come to us, and that would have been how we would have dealt with the threat, or maybe the threat of them taking over our planet.
Oh, cool. And then, of course, Jeff Wayne embedded it in our culture with the music to go along with War of the Worlds.
Oh yes, that I still find that music eerily spooky, even though I hear it many, many years afterwards. It seems to capture that sort of essence of science fictionness and the hopelessness of the human race's cause in trying to battle these aliens who appear to be impervious to atomic blasts. Well, actually, it would have to be some kind of a super duper shield defense the aliens would have, or Martians, anyone, to be able to withstand a nuclear blast.
Yes, indeed. And I think one of my favorite ones for War of the Worlds was the 1950s version, the Hollywood version, with the pastor walking up with his Bible to save him.
Oh yeah, and though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil. Zap.
That's how I learned to scream.
Oh yeah, there we are. So all good stuff. All good stuff. Yes.
Well, you got the 7 minutes of terror. We've got a few more of those coming up soon in February. Well, there's Perseverance is going to go through the 7 minutes.
Yes.
What did you do when Curiosity went through it before?
I think I was in thrall of the scientists' ability to come up with such a great system for landing, and the fact that it worked, as far as we know, faultlessly. made me think of poor old Colin Pillinger, who was so close to success. And it was only because, well, I think they discovered that one of the solar arrays didn't deploy, and had it done so, they would have been transmitting to Earth, and it would have been a great coup for him. But as sadly, he died before he even knew that. So yeah. But I think we've got to the stage now where we're almost expecting the Americans to land anything anywhere, because they seem to be so very good at it, or they're able to throw enough dollars at testing the systems to make sure they work.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to Perseverance's landing come February, and then Tianwen-4 will be landing probably March, April time. So, although we'll probably not know about that one, they'll announce after the fact they landed perfectly, because that's typically what happens with the Chinese Space Agency currently. But yeah, it'd be great to have 2 extra robots on Mars, finding their way around.
Well, I'm hoping that once they start drilling into the surface a little bit and discovering this frost or ice that's supposed to be just subsurface, then that might be the way that we'll be able to get sufficient water and break that down through electrolysis into hydrogen and oxygen to essentially fuel the future spacecraft away from Mars, and also provide the conditions for growing stuff on Mars as well. But who fancies the trip? Because a few people said, well, wouldn't it be better to send a humanoid robot to Mars? Would it be easier to see through their eyes? Because a robot requires no water, no food, just a squirt of WD-40, we're told, every now and then, and that would be about your lot. But somehow or another, it would kind of take away from the human achievement of saying boots on the planet. Yeah. Does anyone else agree? How about you, Charles? What are your views on it?
Me, I can think of people I'd like to send there.
Not quite what I had in mind.
And I can imagine accepting it if, for example, you knew that you had some terminal illness and were going to be sort of fairly fit for a given number of months, and then you drop dead, which isn't the way terminal illnesses tend to work. So otherwise, I'm in favor of sending machines there, personally.
Yes, yeah. I mean, do you think that there's going to be an outpost of some sort on Mars within 20, 30 years?
Me? I mean, the moon possibly, just because you can see the advantage of going to the moon and starting industrial processes there to try and find water, try to find metals, try and actually start making things on the moon. So you can see it's a good case for actually having a base on the moon. And if we all decided to do so, that's something that I think is viable. Beyond that, I think is beyond most of our lives, even Abby's.
You're a slightly younger observer. How do you feel about it? Because you're looking at it from a slightly different perspective. Most of us were teenagers or in our early 20s when the Apollo program landed men on the moon, and that seems like an awfully long time ago, 50 years ago, half a century ago. How do you see it from your slightly younger viewpoint?
Who was that to, sorry?
Yeah, that was to Tony.
Ah.
I'm not sure Tony was listening. Okay. Tony, are you on?
Yeah, no, I'm on. So it's interesting. I mean, I've studied quite a lot of. I did aeronautical engineering in uni, so I did quite a lot of astronomy and not astronomy, but space travel. And my research project was in single stage to orbit space planes. I think it's interesting that. I think I agree. You go to the. There's a good chance we go to the moon, certainly in my lifetime. Mars, maybe a bit of a push. It's good we've got a sort of private industry now that's sort of leading in that area. I think it's got lots of economic potential. I think the chances of getting out there has got, take the Apollo program and the economic benefit it had on the world, the technology. I think going out to Mars and the Moon again will provide that kind of technology again. So it's got lots of social and economic benefits there. I think, but it just needs the governments and industry to invest in it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that was a question or not, but
I think one of the interesting things, well, for me, the take is that 50 or 60 years ago, when we didn't have the technology at all to do that, do a manned or get people living on either the Moon or Mars, everyone was dreaming about living on the Moon. Like lots of writers, popular culture was about traveling to these places and doing these kind of things. But now we're getting closer to having the technology. The more people I talk to, the fewer actually want to do that. They're much more happy at home on planet Earth. I wonder why. It seems to have gone in two different directions. The dreams and the technology, the enabling technologies, they sort of, they haven't met yet.
Do you know, I've often thought about this. When we were kids, didn't we go into, when we went to bed and we imagined we were in our spacecraft, faster than light spacecraft, and we only have to press this button and we're there. We can hover over the surface of Mars because we have an anti-gravity machine that allows us to do this. The usual sort of things that kids harbor. And of course, it was dead easy to travel into space when you're young, and also with your imagination in your dreams. Now that the hardware, as you say, Simon, has become almost everyday stuff, we're no longer surprised that Elon Musk can launch rocket after rocket after rocket and wonderfully be able to land the first stages, the booster stage, back onto a floating platform with pinpoint precision. I mean, crikey, I can hardly park my car in the garage easily without so worrying if I'm scraping the sides. But we can do all this now. So maybe that a lot of the romance has gone out of space travel. It's now very much matter of fact. I mean, look at what those 4 astronauts that went up to the ISS just in the last few days had to do in order to get themselves aloft next to Sweet All, because it's all done for them. They got totally automated systems, and it's just a big screen in front of them, and they're just pressing buttons. And I think half the time they're only doing it for the camera's benefit because they got nothing much to do. It's all pre-programmed. So to be an astronaut now is almost like being a train driver. Well, yeah. They're not quite the same.
Well, one of the biggest, if you actually, I'm not sure if you listened to it, the detail of the audio between sort of Launch Central and the capsule of the spacecraft that went up last week. Their biggest worry was the fact that they still had their iPads out before launch, and they were supposed to have stowed them. And they shouldn't still be using their iPads because they've got the screens in front of them. So that was their biggest worry. Yeah.
I think that's the problem these days, is that the technology is so safe. The youth of today want a bit of excitement. I was actually reading one of Brian Cox's books, the Infinite Monkey Cage one, and he was saying that you get more news on an actor who's pretended to go to the moon than somebody who actually went to the moon, just because it's more exciting, and technology is just, the rocket technology is so safe these days that it's boring. You just go up, you go to the ISS, you come back down. What's the news there?
Yeah, but that's why Apollo died. It wasn't newsworthy. It wasn't political. It wasn't good political capital anymore.
Yeah.
So you couldn't get the funding anymore.
In fact, Apollo 13 was the one that the networks didn't carry, and it was only when there was a good chance, good chance, a bad chance actually, that the astronauts might not make it back home alive, that all of a sudden it was big news. And of course it was nail-biting, minute by minute by minute commentary of what was going on. And I remember at the time thinking, oh my God, those poor people up there. And when you think about it, now I know how the media works, because we've had a good grounding on it in the last few years. The media seems to work on the principle of create a problem that may or may not exist, work a few hypotheses around it, and then put it out as being fact. So that when something happens and they say, now you see, if their heat shield slips, that's it, they're done for. Oh, hang on a second. Tony, you as an engineer or studied engineering, you would make darn sure that the heat shield did not slip. You would make it so that it worked, you know. Yeah. And yet the media will have you say every time, they still go on about if the heat shield fails, or if those ladies that made the bras in the Playtex factory didn't do the stitching correctly on the parachutes, the 3 parachutes that they come down on, it's curtains for them. They say, the next bit of terror is the landing. Oh, the next bit of terror is, will they get swamped in the sea by a huge wave, turn over and drown, you know, all these things. And without it, the space travel could be quite boring, because literally they sit themselves on top of a blooming great November the 5th rocket, and like the blue touch paper, off they go, and then they come back in a fiery descent. Well, you know, we've seen it all, we've heard it all, and it no longer frightens us, except for the fact when there's genuine accidents like the Challenger accident and spacecraft breaking up, coming back into re-entry. So, you know, apart from those few accidents, space travel is, as you say, become routine.
Yeah, because it's that Falcon 9 that landed this morning after putting the Starlinks in into space. That's its 7th launch and land.
Yes.
So
yes.
A lot of early aircraft in the beginning of the 20th century never made 7 takeoffs and landings. That's kind of pretty special in terms of the reliability of the engineering that's going on to do that. But I think one of the things that's going to be most fun about the next generation of those things is because the spaceships can't use parachutes and things to decelerate from hypersonic velocities, they've got to do some really kind of cool aerodynamics in terms of belly flops and to actually try and put up the right profile to slow themselves down when they're coming into an atmosphere like the Earth or like Mars. So there's going to be some spectacular things going on with the next generation of spacecraft that potentially could carry people or large amounts of cargo to whether it be the moon or whether it be to Mars.
I say, Jonathan, I can see you're in orbit already. When is your planned re-entry?
I was just practicing my moonwalking. Sorry,
I could see the Earth's curvature behind you. So
I've already booked my ticket on the next one anyway. So yeah, I think if I win the lottery, I've got my ticket reserved already for the moon. I think.
Oh,
be fine.
Jonathan's our star child for the last shot out of 2001.
I'm just working on getting a crater named after me, but I haven't discovered a planet yet. So,
Jonathan, be careful what you wish for, because as you know, apart from the 3 astronauts that landed first on the moon, you only name craters after people that have moved on.
Yeah, yes, it could be a nice posthumous memory. It'll be on the dark side anyway, knowing my luck.
Oh, indeed. Well, guys, well, thank you once again for joining me on this presentation. I love working to a live audience. This is what I've been used to for over the last 50 odd years being in show business, and it's very, very difficult to try and communicate with an audience when all I can see of you is a little postage stamp image. But I can see you're all moving and breathing, so you obviously must be all right.
Just one comment, if I may, before you go. Getting back to your story, and pick up the Flagstaff is still there, telescope's still there. They run, and I've had a look through that telescope at Jupiter, not Mars. It's pretty impressive. You know, 24-inch refractor is a decent sized telescope. So just to say to everybody else, if you like going to the States, you enjoy Arizona, the Observatory Flagstaff is certainly well worth a visit. And it's being Arizona, of course, if they have open evenings, on the whole, it's clear.
No, I've never been to Arizona. So what is it actually like there at the observatory?
It's fine. It's a hill. It's practically inside. I mean, Flagstaff is the capital of the state. It's a typical American city. It's quite sort of stretched out. You know, lots of trees around the place, and the observatory itself is a hill. Now, actually, within the city, you can probably walk there from the center of the city if you want to. So, as a dark sky spot, is now pretty terrible. Elsewhere in Arizona is far better. But of course, with a 24-inch refractor, you want to look at planets, and they have open evenings. And as I say, I had a good look at Jupiter, and it was pretty good. Pretty good. No, nothing like the detail as you have in Damien Peach's pictures, of course, but still pretty nice. So it's worth a look.
So if you're planning to go on the Great American Eclipse run 2024,
yes, but that's Texas.
Yeah. Well, once you've seen the eclipse, you need something else astronomical.
No, head north. I know. That's fine.
Oh, is that 2024? Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay.
It was one. I did Oregon in a few years ago. That was good.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Bud, for illuminating talk on the non-technical side, sort of the lighter side, and sort of what it would feel like to do some of these adventures and take part in it. And if Elon Musk has his way, he'll be whisking you off to Mars. And going by the way he builds stuff, it crashes and whatever. If you're the first on there, then you might get a crater named after you. But let's hope not. But thank you very much, Tam. It's a wonderful talk, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the year once we're out of lockdown.
Oh, I can't wait for it to say, like Hawkwind Man. We thrive on playing to audiences, and what can you do? The entertainment industry is probably the last to recover from all of this, but we should see. I've great hopes for the future.
Did anyone want to hear Bud's latest track? I've worked out why the sound wasn't working on my computer.
Oh no, they're all switching off. They're all switching off.
No, don't play it. Don't play it. No, it's lovely. And I also recommend, if you're going to go onto YouTube to check things out, check out that one which is the Somerset Space Race by Adge Cutler and the Wurzells as well. That's great. So this formally brings to an end this evening's talk and things like that. But what we'll do is, as per last month, I and the other members of the organising team will just stay on now. And if you just wanted to have a chat, it's perfectly free to now go off and have your cups of tea, go to bed, watch Bake Off if you haven't seen it already. But I'll give you a spoiler in 30 seconds if you don't log off and tell you who actually won it.